What I mentioned today might be one of the last really hot days, or the next couple of days. I guess tomorrow we might see a high of 93. Really hot days of the summer. Officially, summer, of course, we always say it ends. Summer ends on Labor Day, unofficially. The actual end is somewhat later in September, but your kids are already back in school. Everyone they think summer's done. And in fact, I was what was it? Two or 3 days ago, I was watching the kids walk down the street in front of the radio station, and I told Benito, I said, I'm tempted to go out and stand, because I don't have to go to school any longer. I'm tempted to go out and stand on the sidewalk as they walk by and imitate that kid from The Simpsons who always, always laughs at everybody when something goes wrong in their lives. Benito said, if you do that, you might get arrested. So I decided to take the better route on that. Have you noticed, by the way, when it gets really hot like that, if you're sitting near a window, this happens to me at home, if I'm sitting near a window while I'm working on the computer, I can feel that heat radiating through that window. Now, if you put tints in those windows, you will reduce that heat by 72%. That means your air conditioner won't work as hard. That means you'll save on your electric bill, and eventually you'll recoup the cost of putting those tints in. So we've been recommending that you give the good folks at Tint Lady a call. They'll do a free estimate. They'll come out to your house or your business. They'll take a look at your automobile, too, if you'd like to tint that. And what you can do, get that free estimate, and then you can go ahead and actually have them put them in. And I've talked to people who said they swear by this. They say it is just incredible, the difference that it makes. The telephone number, 736-8469. You can also find them at tintladyidaho.com. That's online. They have over 20 years of experience, locally owned and operated, 1887 Highland Avenue East in Twin Falls. Open Monday through Friday, 9 a.m. to 5 p.m., Saturday by appointment only. We didn't get to deal with this a whole lot yesterday because of the situation that was breaking in Virginia, the shooting of the TV reporters. But the night before, there had been apparently it was a televised news conference. All the cable news networks, or cable news network is one of them, but all of them picked up the Donald Trump news conference in Iowa, which turned out to be quite a show, where he was battling with a fellow by the name of, and the guy's name was Jorge Ramos, or Ramos, I guess it could be pronounced, who was with Univision, but they're also jointly owned by NBC and MSDNC. So this fellow, Jorge Ramos, appears on some of those other networks on a somewhat frequent basis. Now, I don't know if any of you caught it, but what happened was Trump had the guy thrown out of the room because he kept interrupting. And then the guy started claiming, this is how he treats media, this is mean, this is wrong, people shouldn't vote for him, he's a totalitarian, etc., etc., etc. Well, over at the TV program Morning Joe, which is a very liberal show on Ramos's sister network, MSDNC, the hosts were having Mike Barnicle, who is a plagiarist and liberal columnist from Boston, along with Joe Scarborough. He's the lone Republican really on the program and not so much conservative any longer, and Mika Brzezinski, whose father gave away Iran to the Mad Mullahs. The three of them are having a discussion about this. You would expect them to be hammering Trump, but guess what?
He's going to go like 5 more points in the poll.
I've been around a long time. I have never seen anything like this. He is playing the media perfectly.
Yeah, and
He's
the media
playing
is
us.
falling really hard for this all.
Well, they're getting in their own way.
They're getting in their own way.
And we've said this before with the McCain
They're not
thing,
being honest.
with the Fox thing. The media
They overreached at Fox in the debate.
They always play into Trump's hand. Ironically,
They thought they could
for a
bring
guy
him
who's
down.
so full of bombast, it's the media that overreacts and says, his campaign's going to be over tomorrow. This is the worst thing that's ever happened.
Right.
And then they say that 3 or 4 times, and it's a boy who cried wolf.
Yeah, but it's a win-win. I mean, look at how much attention Jorge Ramos is getting for this exchange with Donald
pretending
Trump.
that he was bullied and pretending that he was thrown out of a room. Did you see?
And
the guy
making
just went like that.
the story. I mean, Jorge
And
Ramos
made
is making
himself the story.
As I was watching his questioning, I was reminded of Larry King listening to a call and saying, all right, caller, do you have a question? Is there a question?
Well, and what
clearly he wanted to bait Donald Trump, and he succeeded.
Well, I don't think that Trump got the worst end of this. Even some of Trump's enemies. I won't say they're his enemies. Eric Erickson, who banned him from an appearance at the Red State gathering, as well as even Glenn Beck, who's not a big Trump fan, both said Trump just was masterful in how he handled this.
So hilarious, Mike. You look at the transcript. No reporter that I know would go to a press conference
To President Obama.
to President Obama and deliver a speech.
So you can't do that.
He had a hilarious tweet this morning, Jorge Ramos, where he said reporters ask questions.
No, he
Well,
didn't.
if he had actually asked a question up front, we wouldn't be talking about him today. And of course, he wouldn't want that. He wants to make it about him.
Casey Hunt had it right. I mean, it had to be awkward and uncomfortable in that room for the rest of the media.
Yeah, but I'm not sure Trump was the one making it awkward and uncomfortable.
No, correct, yes.
And the question that he finally got to was not a very good one, just to be honest.
Well, he said, how are you going to build the wall? You can't build the wall. And he said, yes, I can. And then he said, well,
it's just the truth.
He was editorializing the whole time. Write an editorial.
There you go. Write an editorial, but don't go and shout and scream and claim you're being harassed by Trump's bodyguards. 8:39. Bill Colley with you. Coming up on 8:40. Got more on the Trump phenomenon, by the way, on the way in just a few minutes. I have a friend who, Dennis Carroll is his name, and he comes from a region of Eastern Europe that you'd be familiar with. Dennis is a lifelong and very devout Roman Catholic. He could probably count on both hands how many times he has missed Mass on a Sunday morning. 66 years. He's missed it less than probably 5 times, actually. And he said to me yesterday, I was on a telephone with him, and he said, this Jorge Ramos is an atheist, used to be a Roman Catholic, and he's fathered several children out of wedlock. And he said, I've got absolutely no respect for him. Well, of course, most leftist media, they're just like Ramos. But at least at this time, or at this point, he kind of dropped the ball on this one now, didn't he? It's 62. Bill Colley with you on Top Story. More coming up. The Jorge Ramos story reminds me of an event that happened in my own life, probably close to 20-some years ago. Ramos was just inflamed that he was forced to leave the room for a time. A bodyguard just pretty much got rid of him. And I'm reminded when I was a younger man, I used to be involved in what was called tavern culture. Haven't been since probably sometime in the 1990s. But all the mix like me, we'd hang around at this place. It was owned by one of our fellow Americans with an Irish name. It's called Dwyer's Pub. But it was in an Italian neighborhood. All the people with Italian names lived in the area. So we kind of all mixed together at this pub on a Friday night and Saturday night. And there used to be a fellow that would hang around in the place. His name was, we just knew him as Joe the Worm. That's how you separated him from a guy named Joe the Pig. I mean, they all had nicknames, and this guy, Joe the Worm, was about the mouthiest guy you could ever find, and he knew everything there was to know. It was Cliff Clavin, but Cliff Clavin with a really nasty attitude. So one night, my friend Steve Barry, who was about 6'4", we were sitting there, and Joe the Worm started in on Steve. Steve got up, and he walked over, and he picked up Joe the Worm, who stood about 5'7", threw Joe over his shoulders, carried him outside, picked him up, sat him down on the sidewalk, and then Steve came back into the applause and cheers of everyone inside Dwyer's Pub. And it reminds me a little bit of what happened the other night with Jorge Ramos dealing with Donald Trump. We're going to have some guests joining us in just a few minutes, about 20 minutes, in fact, from the Twin Falls County Fair Foundation. And we'll be talking about some of the highlights of the upcoming centennial of the fair. So I hope you can stick around for that. They'll be telling us about some of the items, the commemorative items that are for sale as well, that you could pick up this year and right into next year as well to help support the future of this fair. I want to mention next week on the program between 8:30 and 9 o'clock on Wednesday morning, when Dr. Jonathan Tripp joins us for Better Health from Tripp Family Medicine, we're going to be talking about the fair. Actually, the benefits, though, of the fair. And you're invited to call in and join us and have some thoughts on that, too, as well. To give us a call during the course of the program. Now, we want to remind you, we do this every Wednesday with Dr. Tripp or one of his associates. Tripp Family Medicine is located on Fillmore Street in Twin Falls, directly across from the main post office. And we want to point out as well, the doctor is a great resource. So if you have a comment or question, he's more than willing to handle that and point you in the right direction. And remember the slogan, life's too short not to feel good. There's a story that I came across. We were talking about this Trump phenomenon. It's not just in the United States. And I've been reading about this. This is something that's sweeping the entire Western world. And I found this morning at the Washington Times. If you go to the Washington Times website, I don't know that you can buy a hard copy of it anywhere here in this part of Idaho. But if you go to the Washington Times website, a fellow by the name of Daniel Pipes. Daniel Pipes writes for, he's actually, I think, the founder of the Middle East Foundation. And he's a great writer. But he's talking about the events going on in Sweden and see if these parallel what's happening with Donald Trump. He says, according to the most recent poll, the innocuously named but ferociously anti-establishment Sweden Democrats has the largest support of any political party in Sweden. This news has potentially momentous implications, not just for Sweden, but for all of Europe. Until recently, Sweden was a remarkably homogeneous society. This heritage has also inspired an intolerance for dissent. Be quiet, follow the consensus, let the bureaucrats carry it out. Sweden's history creates a no-crisis mentality that militates against the hard-headed, flexible responses needed to cope with current problems, especially those connected to waves of mainly Muslim immigrants. As one interlocutor put it to me, he writes, in Stockholm earlier this month, past success has led to current failure. By the way, they have these ISIS rape gangs that are roaming the streets of their largest cities, committing all sorts of unspeakable crimes. That may be the reason this party is gaining strength. He says the Democrats offer a populist and not, as usually described, a far-right brew of policies anathema to all the legacy parties, that is, the old-line parties. Foremost, it calls for integrating existing legal immigrants, expelling the illegals, and reducing future immigration by 90%. Newspapers have even questioned the consensus about immigration that they've long held, that it was a good thing for the country and that they needed to do the right thing, and that was allow people to come there and take advantage of all of the social welfare policies. So you're seeing it happen in countries where you'd never think Sweden would be going this direction. But most of Europe is starting to head that way, and this is exactly what Donald Trump's tapping into in our own country. It's coming up on 8:49:62. Bill Colley with you on Top Story on News Radio 1310 KLIX. At our website, newsradio1310.com. The telephone number, if you'd like to reach the program, 736-0300. We have a caller with us, and you're up next on air.
Yeah, the Donald Trump thing, I thought was pretty funny right at first. They're like, I can't believe he did that. Well, how many times has Obama thrown people out of one of his deals for just speaking out?
Well, he's given Ed Henry and some of the others quite a hard time.
I thought Donald handled it pretty well and demonstrated something, because he says, the guy kept yelling, how are you going to deport 11 million people? Well, with a wink and a nod, he was gone.
Yeah.
and then as he sat outside and cooled off, he says, well, if he wants to talk, we'll let him come back in. So what did he do? He let him come back through the door, and he gave him more time than anybody else.
And I thank you for the input as well. And as we were talking earlier, Mark Stein brought this up, I think Monday or Tuesday, when he was filling in for Rush Limbaugh. The United States is a country that used to have a can-do attitude. Now when people say, how are you going to, we can't possibly deport all of these people. Yes, we can, one by one if necessary. Well, how can we do a wall? You can't possibly build a wall. And my point was, when Franklin Roosevelt set wartime production goals back in the early 1940s, everyone said it's impossible. Well, guess what? The country not only met them, but greatly exceeded them. The United States can do it. The problem is we've had 50 years of socialist education in public schools and our college campuses, and they've been told, no, we can't do this. America is not exceptional, and it would be mean. We have another caller with us. You're up next. You're on the air with Bill Colley at 8:50.
Hi. I haven't heard it talked about a lot, but that Jorge Ramos, you know what his daughter does? One of his daughters? She works for the Clinton campaign.
I'm not at all surprised.
Yeah, he was kind of a plant, and it was kind of a setup deal. I know there's no love lost between Univision and Trump, but but anyway, that's all I wanted to make. That people aren't talking about all the aspects.
Right. I thank you much for the telephone call. Jorge Ramos, plant's a great way to describe it. He's an obvious plant, though. Everyone knows what his background is. Everyone knows he's just an editorialist. It would be like sending me to a news conference to badger Hillary or Bernie Sanders, because people know my background. I'm not there as an objective observer. 851, Bill Colley with you on News Radio 1310 KLIX and newsradio1310.com. Ramos has also battled in the past with Ann Coulter on immigration issues. Ann Coulter making an appearance with the Daily Signal. That's the Heritage Foundation's website and web service for news. And she was saying that immigration is, at the moment, the only issue that really matters to the future of America.
This is how the Democrats have been winning. They dumped foreign voters on the country who since 1970 have been voting 8-2 for the Democrats. Democrats couldn't get Americans to vote for them. So they looked around and said, fine.
They looked around and said, fine. Yeah, in other words, It's the reason that they are in favor of eliminating the border altogether. When you come right down to it, they'd love to have a North American Union. Socialist Canada, Socialist Mexico, and Socialist United States. Perfect. And then they could just keep printing money and printing money and printing money and telling everyone, don't worry, we'll just print more. Ann Coulter is trying to also explain her point in some depth, and I think she makes a great sense with this next comment.
The only issue, because once we have only Americans voting again, we can win those other issues. If we keep dumping in, oh my gosh, if amnesty goes through, well then it's over overnight. As soon as they become voters, that's 30 million voters for the Democrats. Well, presidential elections are decided by a few million votes.
Sometimes even less. Kennedy-Nixon in 1960, I think that the figure was around 170,000 of the votes cast. And we've had some razor-thin elections in the last 20 years. So it tells you that there's a reason. They're looking at this and they're saying to themselves, we can always hold the White House. They cannot hold Congress, by the way. They cannot hold the state houses. They cannot hold the state legislatures. But their feeling is, with an imperial presidency, a president such as Barack Obama, who thinks that he's actually the emperor, all you need to do is continually win that office and then bully everyone else. 8:54, Bill Colley with you on Top Story on News Radio 1310 KLIX and newsradio1310.com. 736-0300, and you're up next.
Yes, good morning, Bill.
Thank you.
We don't put a stop to this foreign nonsense that's going on. We're going to have all non-English speaking people running our public offices for us.
You know, the other day I was watching the McLaughlin Group. That means I have nothing to do in my spare time. But I was watching the McLaughlin Group, and the very liberal Eleanor Clift made a comment to her fellow panelists that it's a good thing that some of our schools have 100 languages that people are speaking. She claimed that. She said it's a good thing. She didn't offer any evidence, but it shows you the mindset of these people.
Oh, I know that. You fracture the languages in this country, and nothing's ever going to get done because you won't be able to communicate with people different problems.
In other words, divide and conquer.
That's right. Absolutely.
Hey, thank you much for the telephone call. We have another caller joining us, and you're up next. You're on the air on News Radio 1310 KLIX and newsradio1310.com.
Yeah, good morning. Well, as the kids are going back to school, we've got Common Core coming in. And, of course, part of that Common Core curriculum is to replace the God of the Bible, which you can't even mention now, or have prayer in school or anything, but we're going to replace with Allah, That's already happening around the nation.
It's happened right here in my neighborhood. It's happened just a few blocks down the street from the radio stations at the local elementary school when they had the Muhammad quote, which I guess turned out not to actually be a Muhammad quote. It showed you how much the educators knew, but they actually had this during their morning announcements time last spring.
Yeah, it's just unbelievable. It's right here. And people better wake up, and our legislature needs to get rid of Common Core, and we need a lot of Christians to stand up and be counted because we're losing. We're still in a majority, but we're letting 2% dictate what marriage is. We're allowing Common Core is creeping in with world environmental extremism, all of this nonsense, the global warming hoax and so forth, all being taught in our schools, and this is the next generation. So it's just total brainwashing of our finest youth.
Couldn't agree more. I thank you much for the telephone call. I had a thought this morning. I was driving into work, and I was mulling over all of these things that we're seeing happen in this country, and really the destruction of what used to be, was when we called it the greatest country in the world. And no one disputed that. I mean, other countries didn't dispute that. And as I was driving in, it struck me we may have to actually eventually go to war with all of these folks on the left. I mean, it may actually be, and I think I've mentioned this before, but the only way we may end up getting the country back is to go to war against all of the people who are working against its destruction. That's why they fear a fellow like Donald Trump. I keep hearing people say, well, yeah, but he's not really a conservative, and he's a narcissist. But you know what? He speaks bluntly, and he doesn't have any tolerance for all of this as well. And if we only could have, more than a handful of other candidates grow a set we could have much more of this approach. Trump, by the way, still, according to The Hill, dumbfounding pollsters. The businessman's dominance of the Republican presidential race, a writer says, is forcing experienced political hands to question whether everything they knew about winning the White House is wrong. In another act of political magic, Trump managed to flip his favorability rating from negative to positive in one poll during the span of 1 month, a feat that Monmouth University's Patrick Murray called astounding. Trump's favorability rating rose from 20% to 52% among Republican voters between July and August. Now, I don't know about you, but he's resonating and it's growing with people. It's growing with people who are so sick and tired. You can't say that. You can't say this. You looked at me cross-eyed. You've got to come over and jump in bed with Johnny and Jimmy and Ralph and make us all feel better about our lifestyle choices. And if you don't, we're going to have you fired, and you'll never be able to bake a cake again, and we'll lock you in your house for good. People are sick and tired of this minority ruling this country. And you know what? Donald Trump is along for that ride, saying it's got to stop. 9 o'clock news is coming up next. We're going to talk to some folks from the Twin Falls County Fair Foundation. Just a few minutes. They're talking with us about some special commemorative fundraising going on to honor the centennial of the Twin Falls County Fair.